Sarah Mitchell stood at the imposing iron gates of the Hamilton estate, her heart pounding against her worn uniform. At 25, with nothing but a small suitcase and dreams of a better life, she had left her small town in Kansas to work as a maid for one of New York's wealthiest families. The autumn wind whipped through her chestnut hair as she pressed the intercom button with trembling fingers. "You're late," a cold voice crackled through the speaker. "Mrs. Hamilton doesn't tolerate tardiness." The gates creaked open, revealing a mansion that seemed to touch the clouds. Sarah's worn shoes crunched against the gravel driveway as she made her way to the service entrance, where Mrs. Reynolds, the stern-faced head housekeeper, waited with crossed arms and a disapproving frown. "Remember your place," Mrs. Reynolds warned, her gray eyes sharp as steel. "The Hamiltons are not just wealthy, they're powerful. One wrong move, and you'll be back on the street where you belong." Sarah swallowed hard but lifted her chin. Her mother hadn't raised a coward. "I understand, Mrs. Reynolds. I'm here to work, and I'll do my best." The mansion's interior took her breath away, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and priceless artwork adorning every wall. But it was the photograph in the grand hallway that caught her eye, a handsome man with kind eyes, standing beside a beautiful but cold-looking woman and their teenage son. Mr. James Hamilton, his wife Victoria, and their son Alexander. "That's an old photo," a deep voice said behind her. Sarah spun around to find herself face to face with James Hamilton himself. His kind eyes hadn't changed, but grief had etched deep lines around them. "Welcome to our home, Sarah. I hope you'll find your place here." Victoria Hamilton's clicking heels announced her arrival before she appeared, her Chanel perfume filling the air. "James, darling, why are you talking to the help?" Her icy gaze swept over Sarah like she was examining an insect. "Mrs. Reynolds, ensure she understands her duties. And make sure she stays away from the East Wing. It's strictly forbidden." As Sarah followed Mrs. Reynolds to the servants' quarters, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong in this house. The other servants scurried about like scared mice, avoiding eye contact. Whispers died when she entered rooms. And why was the East Wing forbidden? That night, as Sarah lay in her small bed in the servants' quarters, she heard it, a muffled cry coming from somewhere above. She sat up, straining to listen. Was it just the wind? Or something more sinister? "Don't ask questions," her roommate, Jenny, whispered from the other bed. The last maid who got too curious, she disappeared without a trace. "Just do your job, Sarah. And whatever you do, stay away from the East Wing." But Sarah couldn't forget the sound of those cries, nor could she ignore the way Mr. Hamilton's eyes held such deep sadness. As she drifted off to sleep, she made a silent promise to herself: she would discover what dark secrets lay hidden behind these gilded walls, no matter the cost. Little did she know, her arrival had already set in motion events that would shake the Hamilton family to its core. For in her face, James Hamilton had seen a ghost from his past, a past he tried desperately to forget. And in the forbidden East Wing, someone was watching, waiting, and planning to use Sarah as the key to their revenge. The next morning, as Sarah polished the silver in the grand dining room, Alexander Hamilton Jr. stormed in, his designer clothes reeking of expensive cologne. He stopped short when he saw her, his eyes narrowing with an unsettling interest. "So you're the new maid," he said, circling her like a predator. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" "No, sir," Sarah replied, keeping her eyes down. "I've never been to New York until now." He reached out and lifted her chin with his finger, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Be careful in this house, Sarah. Not everything is as it seems. And some secrets." He leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear, "are worth killing for." As he walked away, Sarah's hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the silver tray. What had she gotten herself into? And why did everyone in this house seem to know something she didn't? The answers would come soon enough, but they would shake her world to its foundations and force her to confront not only the Hamilton family's darkest secrets but also the truth about her own past, a truth that had been buried for 25 years, waiting for this moment to explode into the light. The next few days at the Hamilton estate passed in a blur of polishing, dusting, and avoiding Alexander Jr.'s predatory gaze. Sarah threw herself into her work, determined to prove her worth despite Victoria Hamilton's constant criticism. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong in this house. It happened on a stormy Thursday night. Sarah was cleaning the library when she heard voices coming from Mr. Hamilton's study next door. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but Victoria Hamilton's sharp tone cut through the walls like a knife. "She looks exactly like her, James. How dare you bring her into our home?" "I had nothing to do with her hiring," James Hamilton replied, his voice weary. "But maybe it's a sign. Maybe it's time to." "Time to what?" Victoria hissed. "Destroy everything we've built? I won't let you. That girl needs to go before she starts asking questions. Before she finds out." A crash of thunder drowned out the rest of the conversation. Sarah's heart raced. Who did she look like? What were they hiding? Later that night, as rain lashed against the windows, Sarah couldn't sleep. The forbidden East Wing called to her like a siren's song. With everyone else asleep, she slipped out of bed and crept up the grand staircase. The East Wing's corridor was dark, thick with dust and shadows. Sarah's flashlight beam revealed covered furniture and cobwebbed corners. At the end of the hall stood a locked door. As she approached, a floorboard creaked behind her. "Curious little cat, aren't you?" Alexander Jr.'s voice froze her in place. "Looking for answers in all the wrong places." Sarah spun around, her flashlight illuminating his face. For a moment, something almost human flickered in his eyes. "You deserve to know," he said softly. "But knowledge comes with a price in this house. Are you willing to pay it?" Before she could answer, voices echoed from downstairs. Alexander pressed something cold and metallic into her hand, a key. "Tomorrow night," he whispered. "After midnight. But if you get caught, I had nothing to do with this." Sarah fled back to her room, her heart pounding. The key burned in her palm like a forbidden promise. The next morning, while cleaning Victoria Hamilton's private sitting room, Sarah discovered a torn photograph hidden behind a loose panel. Her hands trembled as she pieced it together. A younger James Hamilton stood beside a woman who could have been Sarah's twin, holding a baby in her arms. On the back, written in faded ink, James, Elizabeth, and baby Sarah, 1999. The vacuum cleaner slipped from Sarah's nerveless fingers, crashing to the floor. Elizabeth. Sarah. 1999, the year she was born. The year her mother died, or so she'd been told. "What are you doing in here?" Victoria Hamilton's voice cracked like a whip. Sarah jumped, shoving the photograph into her pocket. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hamilton. I was just cleaning." "Get out." Victoria's face had gone chalk white. "Get out before I call security." Sarah fled, but not before seeing the fear in Victoria Hamilton's eyes. Fear and recognition. That afternoon, Jenny cornered her in the laundry room. "You need to leave," she whispered urgently. "I heard Mrs. Hamilton on the phone. She's calling someone about you, someone dangerous. Please, Sarah. Whatever you're looking for, it's not worth your life." But Sarah couldn't leave. Not now. Not when she was so close to the truth. As midnight approached, she lay in bed fully dressed, waiting for the house to fall silent. The key Alexander had given her felt heavy in her pocket. Outside, another storm was brewing, thunder rolling across the sky like drums of war. At exactly midnight, Sarah crept back to the East Wing. The key fit perfectly into the locked door. Inside, she found a room frozen in time, a nursery, untouched for decades. A music box sat on a dusty dresser. When Sarah opened it, a lullaby tinkled through the air, and a folded letter fluttered to the floor. "My dearest Sarah," it began. "If you're reading this, then I failed to protect you. The truth is, I wondered how long it would take you to find this place," a voice said behind her. Sarah whirled around to find James Hamilton standing in the doorway, tears streaming down his face. "You look so much like your mother." "My mother?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Elizabeth?" "Yes." James stepped into the room, touching the music box with trembling fingers. "Elizabeth was my first wife, and you are my daughter." Before Sarah could process this revelation, a scream echoed through the mansion, Victoria Hamilton's scream. And then, a gunshot shattered the night. Thunder crashed outside as footsteps pounded up the stairs. Sarah and James raced to the landing just in time to see Victoria stumbling from her bedroom, blood staining her silk nightgown. "He's back," she gasped, collapsing into James's arms. "Matthew is back." Sarah's world spun as another figure stepped out of the shadows, a man she'd never seen before, but whose face she knew from her nightmares. The man who had taken her from her real family 25 years ago. "Hello, little Sarah," Matthew smiled, raising his gun. "Did you miss your uncle?" Time seemed to freeze as Matthew's gun pointed at Sarah's heart. The storm outside intensified, lightning illuminating his scarred face in harsh flashes. James Hamilton stepped forward, shielding both Sarah and the bleeding Victoria with his body. "You've done enough damage, Matthew," James said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "Elizabeth wouldn't have wanted this." Matthew's laugh was hollow. "Elizabeth? My dear sister died because of you, James. Because you chose your empire over her life. And now..." His eyes gleamed with madness. "Now it's time for everyone to pay." "That's not true." Victoria gasped, clutching her wounded shoulder. "Tell her the truth, James. Tell Sarah what really happened that night." Alexander Jr. appeared at the top of the stairs, his usual arrogance replaced by genuine fear. "Dad, the police are on their way." I triggered the silent alarm. Matthew's finger tightened on the trigger. Perfect. More witnesses for the fall of the mighty Hamilton family. But first, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a yellowed envelope. "Sarah deserves to know everything. About her mother. About the baby switch. About Victoria's role in destroying her family." "Baby switch?" Sarah's voice shook. "What is he talking about?" "Oh, this is delicious," Matthew sneered. "You never told her, did you, Victoria? How you paid the nurse to switch the babies that night? How you made sure your sickly newborn took the place of Elizabeth's healthy daughter? How your real child died, while you raised Elizabeth's baby as Alexander Jr.? The words hit like physical blows. Sarah looked at Alexander Jr., really looked at him, and saw her mother's eyes staring back at her. He wasn't Victoria's son at all. He was her brother. "I did what I had to do," Victoria sobbed. "My baby was dying. Elizabeth had everything, James's love, a healthy child. It wasn't fair." "So you stole her baby," Sarah whispered. "And then what? What happened to my mother?" James's face crumpled. "Elizabeth discovered the switch. She confronted Victoria, threatened to expose everything. That night..." His voice broke. "That night, she died in a car accident. The brakes had been tampered with. By Victoria's order," Matthew added. "My sister's death was no accident. And poor little Sarah, the real Sarah, was shipped off to Kansas with a fake birth certificate and fake parents." Lightning cracked overhead as the truth settled over the room like poison gas. Alexander, no, not Alexander, but Thomas, her true brother, moved to stand beside Sarah, their mother's features mirrored in both their faces. "I always felt something was wrong," he said softly. "The way Mom, Victoria, looked at me. The way she'd flinch when I reminded her of someone else." How touching, Matthew raised his gun again. The long-lost siblings reunited. But it's too late for happy endings. Victoria took my sister from me. Now I'll take everything from her. Drop the gun, Matthew. A new voice rang out. Jenny stood at the other end of the hallway, holding a revolver with steady hands. "It's over." "Jenny?" Sarah gasped. "Detective Jennifer Collins, FBI," Jenny corrected, not taking her eyes off Matthew. "We've been investigating the Hamilton family's connection to Elizabeth's death for years. Just waiting for the evidence." Matthew's finger squeezed the trigger, but Jenny was faster. 2 shots rang out simultaneously. Matthew's bullet grazed Sarah's arm as he fell, Jenny's shot hitting him square in the chest. As Matthew lay bleeding on the expensive carpet, he pulled one final envelope from his jacket. "The proof," he gasped. "DNA tests. Bank transfers. Victoria's original contract with the nurse. Everything Elizabeth discovered before. His eyes glazed over as he pressed the envelope into Sarah's hands. Police sirens wailed in the distance as Victoria Hamilton collapsed, her wounded shoulder forgotten in the face of her exposed crimes. "I just wanted a healthy child," she whispered. "I never meant for Elizabeth to die. Matthew, he worked for me back then, as my driver. When I told him about Elizabeth's threats, he took matters into his own hands. The brakes. I didn't know until it was too late." Sarah stood in the middle of the chaos, her world completely shattered and reformed. James Hamilton, her real father, reached for her hand. "I searched for you for years," he said. "But Victoria had hidden your trail too well. When you showed up at our door, you looked so much like Elizabeth. I knew, but I couldn't be sure. I couldn't protect your mother, but I swear I'll spend the rest of my life making this right." Thomas, the brother she never knew she had, took her other hand. "We have a lot of catching up to do, little sister." As the police flooded the mansion and paramedics rushed to treat Victoria and Matthew, Sarah finally understood the weight of the key Alexander, no, Thomas, had given her. It hadn't just unlocked a door, it had unlocked the truth about her past, her family, and her mother's murder. But as she stood between her newfound father and brother, watching Victoria Hamilton being led away in handcuffs, Sarah realized this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Because somewhere in this mansion, hidden in 25 years of secrets and lies, was her mother's true legacy, and Sarah wouldn't rest until she found it. The next morning, the Hamilton estate was crawling with FBI agents. Sarah sat in her father's study, surrounded by evidence boxes and old photographs. Her arm throbbed where Matthew's bullet had grazed it, but she barely noticed the pain. She was too focused on the documents spread before her. Elizabeth kept meticulous records, Detective Collins explained, sorting through the evidence Matthew had collected. Bank statements, surveillance photos, private investigator reports. She was building a case against Victoria before she died. Sarah picked up a photo of her mother, Elizabeth Hamilton, radiant in her wedding dress beside a younger James. "Why didn't you tell me who you were when I arrived?" she asked Detective Collins. Jenny, or rather, Jennifer, smiled sadly. "We needed Victoria to reveal herself. When you applied for the maid position, it was like fate handed us the perfect opportunity. I'm sorry for the deception, but your mother's case has haunted the FBI for years. Too many powerful people worked to keep it buried." Thomas entered the study, carrying more files from the East Wing nursery. The resemblance between them was undeniable now, same green eyes, same determined set of their jaws. "I found something," he said, placing an old leather diary on the desk. "Mom's private journal." Sarah's hands trembled as she opened it. Elizabeth's elegant handwriting filled the pages. August 15, 1999, something's wrong. The baby they brought me doesn't feel like mine. Victoria's behavior is strange, guilty, almost frightened. When I demanded to see her son, she refused. James thinks I'm being paranoid, but a mother knows her own child. September 3, 1999, I hired a private investigator. The night nurse who handled the deliveries disappeared 2 days after the births. Her bank account suddenly filled with $500,000 from an offshore account linked to Victoria. October 1, 1999, DNA test confirms my worst fears. The baby they gave me isn't mine. My real daughter was given to Victoria, while her sickly son was passed to me. He died 3 days ago, not my child, but I mourned him all the same. Victoria stole my baby, and I'll make her pay. October 15, 1999, Matthew helped me gather evidence. Victoria's crimes go beyond the baby switch. Shell companies, money laundering, blackmail. The Hamilton fortune is built on blood. If anything happens to me, the truth is hidden in. The last entry ended abruptly. The next page was torn out. She knew, Sarah whispered. She knew everything, and they killed her for it. James Hamilton stood in the doorway, looking older than ever. I was blind, he admitted. Victoria handled all our business affairs. I never questioned where the money came from, never saw how she was using Matthew to intimidate and eliminate anyone who threatened her position. By the time I realized the truth about the baby switch, Elizabeth was dead, and you were gone." "Mr. Hamilton," Detective Collins interrupted, holding up a document. "We found irregularities in your company's accounts. Victoria wasn't just laundering money, she was funding a human trafficking operation through your charitable foundation." The color drained from James's face. "The orphanages," he breathed. "She said we were helping abandoned children find homes abroad. But the children, they were being sold?" "To wealthy families around the world," Detective Collins confirmed. "Elizabeth discovered it. That's why Victoria had to silence her." Sarah felt sick. The scope of Victoria's crimes went far beyond her personal vendetta. How many lives had been destroyed by that woman's greed? A young FBI agent burst into the study. "Detective Collins, Mrs. Hamilton is demanding to speak with Sarah. She says she knows where Elizabeth hid the missing evidence." "It's a trap," Thomas warned, but Sarah was already standing. "I need to know," she said firmly. "Everything." The local police station was cold and sterile. Victoria Hamilton sat handcuffed to the table, her designer clothes replaced by an orange jumpsuit. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. "I knew you'd come," Victoria said as Sarah sat across from her. "You have her strength. Her determination." She leaned forward. "Elizabeth hid something in the mansion before she died. Something that would destroy not just me, but half of New York's elite. Names, dates, transactions, proof of crimes that would shake this city to its core." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm dying." Victoria's smile was bitter. "Cancer. 6 months at most. Prison is a death sentence either way. But before I go, I want to make a deal." Sarah's heart pounded. "What kind of deal?" "I'll tell you where Elizabeth hid her evidence. In return, you help protect your father. James was innocent, he never knew about the trafficking, the murders, any of it. I handled everything through shell companies and proxies." "And Thomas?" "Your brother will inherit everything once the dust settles. He deserves that much. I may not be his real mother, but I did love him, in my way." Sarah studied the woman who had stolen her life, killed her mother, and torn apart countless families. "Where's the evidence?" Victoria whispered 2 words, "Mirror Lake." As Sarah left the police station, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Mirror Lake holds more than its reflection. Some secrets are better left undisturbed. Last warning." The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. Mirror Lake turned out to be a secluded body of water on the Hamilton estate's vast grounds, hidden behind overgrown gardens. As Sarah, Thomas, and Detective Collins approached the murky waters at dawn, frost crunched beneath their feet. "Mother used to come here every day," Thomas said, scanning the shoreline. "She'd sit on that bench for hours, just staring at the water. I always thought she was grieving her dead son, me. Now I know she was grieving her lost daughter." Sarah studied the weathered wooden bench. Something about the way it was positioned. "The reflection," she murmured. Victoria said Mirror Lake holds more than its reflection. Detective Collins pulled out a metal detector. "The lake bed could hide anything. We'll need a dive team." "No," Sarah interrupted. "Look at the bench. Look at what it's reflecting." In the still morning water, the bench's reflection pointed directly at a partially submerged concrete structure, an old boathouse, its entrance barely visible through years of overgrowth. Inside, the air was thick with decay. Their flashlights revealed rotting wood and rusted boathooks. But it was the wall that caught Sarah's attention, specifically, one brick that didn't quite match the others. "Help me with this," she said. Together, they pried the brick loose, revealing a waterproof safe behind it. "The combination," Thomas muttered. "We need." "I know it," Sarah said quietly. She traced her fingers over the dial. October 15, 1999. The date of Mom's last diary entry. The safe clicked open. Inside lay a USB drive, a stack of photographs, and a letter addressed to "My darling daughter." Sarah's hands shook as she read her mother's final words. "My dearest Sarah. If you're reading this, then Victoria's crimes have finally come to light. The USB contains everything: offshore account numbers, client lists, surveillance footage of her meetings with traffickers. But more importantly, it contains proof of who really runs the operation: Judge Richard Morrison. Yes, the same judge who blocked every investigation into the Hamilton Foundation. He and Victoria built this network together, using his position to protect their crimes while they sold children to the highest bidders. I'm meeting Morrison tonight. He doesn't know I have copies of everything. If anything happens to me, take this to FBI agent Marcus Chen. He's the only one I trust. Know that I loved you from the moment you were born. I fought to get you back, and I will never stop fighting. All my love. Mom. Agent Chen, Detective Collins breathed. He was my mentor. He disappeared 10 years ago investigating judicial corruption. A twig snapped outside. Sarah whirled around to see a figure in the doorway, Judge Morrison himself, flanked by 2 armed men. Elizabeth was always too clever for her own good, Morrison said coldly. Like mother, like daughter. It's over, Richard, a new voice called. FBI vehicles surrounded the boathouse, agents emerging with weapons drawn. Leading them was an older Asian man with graying hair. Agent Chen? Detective Collins gasped. Sorry I'm late, Chen smiled grimly. Spent 10 years undercover building a case against our friend here. Just needed the final piece of evidence. He nodded at the USB drive in Sarah's hand. Morrison's men dropped their weapons. The judge himself aged decades in seconds. Victoria promised she destroyed everything, he whispered. Victoria underestimated a mother's love, Sarah replied. And her determination to protect her child. As Morrison was led away in handcuffs, Sarah clutched her mother's letter to her chest. Thomas wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and together they watched the sun rise over Mirror Lake. What happens now? Thomas asked. Now, Sarah said, we free every child they trafficked. We find their families. We make this right. Elizabeth would be proud, James Hamilton said, joining them by the water. Of both of you. Sarah looked at her newfound family, her father's gentle strength, her brother's protective stance. The morning light sparkled on Mirror Lake's surface, washing away decades of darkness. But as she watched Morrison being driven away, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they'd only scratched the surface of this conspiracy. The USB drive felt heavy in her pocket. What other secrets would her mother's final evidence reveal? And more importantly, how many powerful people would try to keep those secrets buried? The Hamilton estate study had become an impromptu command center. FBI cybercrime experts huddled around laptops, decrypting Elizabeth's USB drive. Sarah watched as years of carefully gathered evidence spilled across screens. This is incredible, Agent Chen muttered, scrolling through endless spreadsheets. Bank transfers, recorded conversations, surveillance photos. Your mother built an airtight case. Sarah leaned closer to a screen displaying a photograph. A younger Judge Morrison stood beside Victoria Hamilton at what appeared to be a charity gala. In the background, a familiar face caught her attention. Wait, she gasped. Zoom in on that man behind them. The technician enhanced the image, revealing a distinguished-looking man in his 60s. Senator William Blackwood, Agent Chen identified. Head of the Justice Committee. Look at the date, Thomas pointed. This was taken 3 days before Mom died. More photos followed, Morrison and Blackwood meeting in private clubs, Victoria handling briefcases of cash. Then came the video files. Elizabeth had hidden cameras everywhere. I can explain everything, Morrison's voice crackled through speakers. The adoption agencies are just a front. We place the kids with vetted families, they make donations to our foundation. Everyone wins. And the ones who disappear? Victoria's voice was cold. The ones Blackwood's special clients request? Necessary sacrifices for the greater good. The senator's support keeps us untouchable. Sarah felt sick. How deep does this go? All the way to Washington, Agent Chen replied grimly. Blackwood chairs the committee investigating human trafficking. He's been burying evidence for years. James Hamilton burst into the study, his face ashen. Victoria's dead. What? Sarah and Thomas spoke simultaneously. Found in her cell an hour ago. They're calling it suicide, but... James handed over his phone, displaying a text message, "Loose ends must be tied. You're next. We need to move you all to a safe house," Detective Collins began, but Sarah cut her off. "No. Mom didn't hide for 25 years. I won't hide now." Thomas nodded. "We fight back. Together." Agent Chen's phone buzzed. His expression darkened as he read the message. Senator Blackwood just called an emergency press conference. He's announcing a federal investigation into the Hamilton Foundation. He's trying to control the narrative, Detective Collins realized. Paint himself as the hero uncovering corruption. Not if we beat him to it. Sarah pulled out her mother's letter. Mom trusted the media once before. Let's do it right this time. Within hours, they were set up in a secure broadcast studio. Sarah sat before the cameras, her father and brother flanking her, Elizabeth's evidence displayed on screens behind them. "My name is Sarah Mitchell Hamilton," she began, her voice steady. 25 years ago, my mother discovered a criminal enterprise operating within New York's elite. Today, I'm finishing what she started. The evidence was irrefutable. Bank records showed millions flowing through Blackwood's offshore accounts. Surveillance footage captured him personally inspecting merchandise, children torn from their families. Email chains revealed a network spanning 3 continents. As Sarah spoke, FBI teams moved simultaneously across the city. Judge Morrison's co-conspirators, corrupt officials, everyone who had helped bury Elizabeth's murder, all were taken into custody. But Senator Blackwood had disappeared. "He's not running," Agent Chen said, studying traffic camera footage. "He's too arrogant for that." "Then where?" Sarah trailed off as realization struck. "The children. The ones who disappeared. We never found where they were kept." Thomas was already pulling up property records. Blackwood owns a compound upstate. Private security, no visitors. "That's it." Sarah grabbed her coat. "That's where they are." "Sarah, wait," James caught her arm. "We should let the FBI handle this. They're children, Dad. Like I was. Stolen from their families, their lives destroyed by people like Victoria and Blackwood. Mom died trying to save them. I won't fail them too." The drive to Blackwood's compound was tense. FBI tactical teams surrounded the property while Sarah, Thomas, and Agent Chen approached the main gate. Security cameras tracked their movement. "It's over, Senator," Chen called out. "Surrender now." The intercom crackled. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," Blackwood's voice was eerily calm. "These children are destined for greatness. Their adoptive families are the most powerful people in the world. Kings, presidents, billionaires, all willing to pay whatever it takes for the perfect heir. They're not products," Sarah's voice shook with rage. "They're human beings. They're investments," Blackwood replied. "And I protect my investments." The gates suddenly swung open. Inside, they found Blackwood calmly sitting in his office, surrounded by computer screens showing live feeds from around the world, mansions, penthouses, private islands. In each feed, children played under heavy guard. "One button," he smiled, holding up a remote. "One button and every one of these locations goes into lockdown. The children disappear forever. So, let's negotiate." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "No deals." She nodded to Agent Chen, who pressed a button on his phone. Every screen went dark. "What?" Blackwood's smile faltered. "While you were watching us," Thomas explained, "our cyber team was tracing your feeds. Every location has been rated simultaneously. The children are safe." Blackwood's facade cracked. He lunged for his desk drawer, but Sarah was faster. As she tackled him, a gun clattered to the floor. "This is for my mother," she whispered, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. Outside, the sun was rising. News helicopters circled overhead as FBI agents led groups of children to waiting buses. Years of darkness were finally giving way to dawn. But Sarah's work wasn't done. Somewhere in Blackwood's files lay the true identities of these children, the families they'd been stolen from. It would take years to reunite them all, to heal the wounds Victoria and Blackwood had inflicted. She was ready for the fight. After all, she was Elizabeth Hamilton's daughter. And like her mother, she would never stop fighting for justice. The weeks following Blackwood's arrest were a whirlwind of international investigations, tearful family reunions, and endless depositions. Sarah worked tirelessly alongside Agent Chan, using Elizabeth's evidence to unravel decades of corruption. But the deeper they dug, the darker the secrets became. It wasn't just children, Sarah said one evening, staring at her mother's recovered files. They were creating dynasties. Placing specific children with specific families to create networks of influence spanning generations. Thomas nodded grimly. Like pieces on a chessboard. Victoria and Blackwood were engineering the future, one stolen child at a time. Agent Chen entered the study, holding a fresh stack of reports. We've identified another pattern. Many of the children were placed with families connected to major technology companies. Blackwood was building a network of future tech leaders. But why? James asked, reviewing the files. What was the endgame? Sarah's phone buzzed, a message from an encrypted number, asked Victoria about Project Legacy. EH? Thomas peered at the screen. Elizabeth Hamilton? That's impossible. Sarah's hands trembled. Mom's last diary entry mentioned a Project Legacy, but the page was torn out. A quick call to the prison confirmed Victoria had left a sealed envelope for Sarah, to be delivered in the event of her death. Within hours, a courier arrived with a thick manila package. Inside, they found a USB drive and a letter in Victoria's elegant handwriting. Dear Sarah. By now you know the truth about the trafficking network, but not its true purpose. Project Legacy wasn't just about selling children, it was about controlling the future. Blackwood and his associates believed they could shape the next century by placing carefully selected children in positions of power. Tech companies, political offices, financial institutions, all would be led by people who owed their positions to us. But Elizabeth discovered something even darker. Some of the children weren't just selected, they were created. Genetic engineering, secret laboratories, experiments to produce perfect heirs. Your mother found one of these labs. That's why she had to die. The truth is, Sarah, you weren't just switched at birth. You were designed. Elizabeth wasn't my rival, she was my sister. We were both part of Project Legacy from the beginning, but she turned against it when she discovered what they'd done to her baby, to you. I'm sorry. For everything. The USB contains locations of all the legacy laboratories. Shut them down. Save those children like Elizabeth tried to save you. Victoria. Sarah sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. Victoria wasn't just her enemy, she was her aunt. And she herself was a product of genetic manipulation. This changes nothing, Thomas said firmly, gripping her hand. You're still my sister. Still Elizabeth's daughter. He's right, James added. Elizabeth loved you because you were her child, not because of how you were born. Agent Chen was already coordinating raids on the laboratory locations. We'll need to move fast. Once word gets out about Victoria's death, they'll start destroying evidence. Sarah stared at her reflection in the study's window. What else had they changed about her? What other secrets were coded in her DNA? A commotion outside drew their attention. FBI agents were rushing to their vehicles, radios crackling with urgent messages. What's happening? Sarah demanded. Detective Collins burst in, breathless. They found Judge Morrison dead in his cell. And Blackwood, he's escaped custody. Security footage showed a prison guard, later identified as a legacy operative, helping Blackwood walk out in a guard's uniform. He'll be heading for the laboratories, Sarah realized. To destroy the evidence and the children. Thomas was already checking his weapon. Not if we get there first. Sarah grabbed her coat, but James caught her arm. Sarah, wait. Victoria's letter, there's something else you need to know. He pulled out an old photograph, Elizabeth and Victoria as young girls, standing before a stern-looking man in a laboratory coat. The man's face was hauntingly familiar. "Senator Blackwood," Sarah whispered. James nodded gravely. "He's your grandfather. The architect of Project Legacy. And he's been watching you your entire life, waiting to see if his greatest experiment would fulfill its destiny." The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow. She wasn't just a victim of Project Legacy, she was its culmination. Everything, from her mother's death to her arrival at the Hamilton estate, had been orchestrated. But Blackwood had made one crucial mistake. He'd given her Elizabeth's strength, her determination to fight injustice. And now, that same strength would bring his empire crashing down. "Let him come," Sarah said, checking her own weapon. "It's time to end this. Once and for all." The final battle for Project Legacy was about to begin. But this time, Sarah wasn't fighting alone. She had her brother, her father, and her mother's indomitable spirit guiding her path. As they headed for the cars, Sarah touched the locket containing Elizabeth's picture. "I'll finish what you started, Mom. I promise." The first Legacy laboratory was hidden beneath an abandoned psychiatric hospital in upstate New York. As Sarah, Thomas, and the FBI tactical team approached the building, dawn was just beginning to break. Multiple heat signatures below ground, Agent Chen reported, studying thermal imaging. At least 20 children, plus adult guards. "Remember," Sarah addressed the team, "these kids have been through trauma. We go in quiet, no sudden moves." The entrance was disguised as a maintenance elevator. As they descended, Sarah's heart pounded. What horrors would they find? What had been done to these children in the name of genetic perfection? The doors opened to a sterile white corridor. The air smelled of antiseptic and fear. "Welcome home, Sarah." Blackwood's voice echoed through hidden speakers. "I've been waiting for this moment for 25 years. Security doors slammed shut, separating Sarah and Thomas from the FBI team. Gas began hissing through the vents. "Don't fight it," Blackwood continued. "The gas won't harm you, it's coded to your specific DNA. The others, however." Sarah watched in horror as the FBI agents collapsed. Thomas swayed but remained standing. "Interesting," Blackwood mused. "It seems the Hamilton blood is stronger than expected in both of you. What do you want?" Sarah demanded, supporting her brother. "To show you your inheritance. Follow the lights." Blue LED strips illuminated a path deeper into the facility. With no other choice, Sarah and Thomas followed. They entered a vast circular chamber. Glass tubes lined the walls, each containing a sleeping child suspended in clear fluid. Monitoring equipment beeped steadily, measuring vital signs. "My life's work," Blackwood emerged from the shadows. "The next stage of human evolution." "You're a monster," Thomas spat. "I'm a visionary. Look at them, perfect health, enhanced intelligence, specific traits selected and amplified. They'll shape the future of humanity." "They're children," Sarah countered. "Not experiments." "You were my greatest success," Blackwood approached her. "Elizabeth's compassion, Victoria's determination, and my scientific genius, all combined in one perfect specimen. Join me, Sarah. Help me complete Project Legacy." By stealing more children? Destroying more families? By saving our species. Climate change, nuclear war, artificial intelligence, humanity faces extinction on multiple fronts. These children are our only hope for survival. A small movement caught Sarah's eye. Behind Blackwood, a young girl had emerged from hiding. She couldn't have been more than 8, with Sarah's green eyes and determined expression. "Sarah Mitchell," the girl said clearly. "Elizabeth Hamilton's daughter. We've been waiting for you." More children appeared, surrounding Blackwood. All bore subtle resemblances to Sarah, distant genetic echoes. "What is this?" Blackwood demanded. "We remember our real parents," the first girl continued. "We dream about them every night. The experiments didn't just enhance our bodies, they enhanced our minds, our connection to each other. We've been watching, learning, waiting for the right moment. The children joined hands, forming a circle around Blackwood. The laboratory's equipment began to malfunction, alarms blaring. "Impossible," Blackwood whispered. "The psychic abilities weren't supposed to manifest for years." "You made us special," the girl smiled. "Now face the consequences." The laboratory's systems went haywire. Containment tubes drained, security doors opened. In the distance, Sarah could hear the FBI team recovering, rushing toward them. "It's over, grandfather," Sarah said softly. "Your legacy ends here." Blackwood reached for a hidden gun, but Thomas was faster. As the senator fell, Sarah saw not a mastermind or a monster, but a deluded old man whose ambition had destroyed countless lives. The children were quickly evacuated, reunited with FBI medical teams above ground. The girl who had spoken, Lucy, she said her name was, hugged Sarah tightly. "We knew you'd come," Lucy whispered. "We saw you in our dreams, fighting for justice like your mother." As the sun rose over the hospital, Sarah watched the children boarding medical transports. Each one would need extensive therapy, support to overcome their trauma. But they were free. Thomas joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You okay?" Sarah touched her locket, feeling Elizabeth's strength flowing through her. "Mom didn't just leave us evidence," she realized. "She left us an army." Every child Blackwood experimented on, every life he tried to control, they're all part of her legacy now. A legacy of justice, not control. But as she watched Lucy wave goodbye, Sarah couldn't shake a nagging fear. How many more legacy laboratories were out there? And what other genetic time bombs waited to explode in these children's futures? The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. 1 month after Blackwood's death, Sarah sat in her mother's old room at the Hamilton estate, surrounded by newly discovered documents. The FBI had raided all known legacy laboratories, freeing hundreds of genetically enhanced children. But one mystery remained unsolved. "Look at this," Thomas said, spreading out old blueprints. Every legacy facility had a sealed vault. All empty when we found them. Because everything important was moved here, Sarah realized, studying the Hamilton estate's original plans. The mansion wasn't just Victoria's home, it was Legacy's central archive. James entered, carrying a dusty ledger. Elizabeth's personal records. She mapped the entire tunnel system beneath the estate. The tunnels had been there all along, hidden behind the mansion's walls. Using Elizabeth's maps, they found the entrance behind a false panel in the East Wing nursery. "Mom knew everything," Sarah whispered as they descended the narrow stairs. "She wasn't just gathering evidence, she was protecting us from the truth." The underground chamber was vast, lined with servers and filing cabinets. But it was the medical bay that stopped them cold. Incubation chambers, genetic sequencing equipment, and one wall covered in photographs, hundreds of children, each labeled with a code name and genetic profile. Project Legacy wasn't just about trafficking, Agent Chen said, examining the files. They were creating a database of genetic traits, testing different combinations in each generation. Sarah found her own file, Subject Alpha 1, primary integration success. Hamilton Blackwood bloodline stabilized. Empathy levels optimal. Leadership traits dominant. They were breeding a ruling class, Thomas realized. Using genetic engineering to create perfect leaders. Not just leaders, Lucy's voice made them jump. The young girl stood in the doorway, other legacy children behind her. "We're connected. All of us. We share dreams, feelings, memories. Even now, more of us are awakening around the world." Sarah felt it then, a subtle hum in her mind, like distant voices calling. The other children felt it too, their eyes lighting up with recognition. Elizabeth tried to stop it, Agent Chen said, reading through more files. She discovered the genetic modifications were spreading, passing from generation to generation. In 50 years, a significant percentage of the human population would carry legacy genes. "And now it's happening," Lucy said calmly. "We're evolving, just like Blackwood wanted. But not into his servants, into something else. Something free." A computer screen flickered to life, displaying a video file. Elizabeth Hamilton's face filled the screen, younger but with the same determined expression Sarah saw in the mirror. If you're watching this, the truth about Project Legacy has finally emerged. Sarah, my darling daughter, I'm so sorry for the burden I've placed on you. The genetic modifications can't be reversed, but they can be guided. Legacy children will have powers beyond normal humans, but with your help, they'll use those gifts for good, not control. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. I couldn't stop what they did to you, but I could ensure you'd have the strength to lead when the time came. The Hamilton blood carries compassion, justice, and love, qualities no genetic engineering can replicate. That's your true inheritance, Sarah. Not Blackwood's ambition or Victoria's cunning, but the choice to use your gifts to protect others. The video ended. Sarah looked at the legacy children gathered around her, seeing in their faces the same mix of fear and hope she felt. What do we do now? Thomas asked softly. We help them, Sarah replied. We turn the Hamilton estate into a sanctuary. A school where legacy children can learn to control their abilities, to use them for good. We build the future Mom wanted, not through control, but through choice. Lucy took her hand, and Sarah felt the connection strengthen, not just to the girl, but to all the legacy children. Their shared genes had created a network, a family bound by more than blood. Elizabeth's legacy, James said proudly. Not the maid who exposed a family's secrets, but the mother who sparked a revolution. As they emerged from the tunnels into the dawnlight, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The truth was finally free, and with it came hope. The Hamilton estate would no longer be a house of secrets, but a home for a new generation of extraordinary children. But in a hidden legacy facility on the other side of the world, another screen flickered to life. Another group of enhanced children watched and waited. And in their shared dreams, they saw a storm coming, one that would test Sarah and her newfound family in ways they could never imagine. The real battle for humanity's future was just beginning. 1 year later, the Hamilton estate had transformed. Where once stood a mansion of secrets, now thrived a sanctuary for legacy children. Sarah watched from her mother's old balcony as dozens of young students practiced controlling their abilities in the gardens below. Lucy, now her trusted deputy, approached with urgent news. They found another facility. Singapore. Hundreds of children, all awakening simultaneously. Thomas joined them, reviewing satellite images on his tablet. That's the 7th facility this month. The genetic network is spreading faster than we predicted. Sarah felt the familiar hum of connected minds, stronger now, spanning continents. Every day, more legacy children discovered their abilities, their shared consciousness growing stronger. Director Hamilton? Agent Chen appeared in the doorway. You need to see this. In the command center they'd built in the old East Wing, screens displayed news reports from around the world. Legacy children were emerging everywhere, their gifts manifesting in ways even Blackwood hadn't anticipated. Telepathy, telekinesis, accelerated healing, humanity was changing. Some people are calling it the next step in evolution, James said, watching the reports. Others are terrified. Governments are already talking about registration programs, containment protocols. They're just children, Sarah insisted. They need guidance, not control. That's why they need you, a familiar voice said. Everyone turned to see Jenny, Detective Collins, entering with a silver-haired woman. Sarah's heart stopped. The woman was older, with streaks of gray in her dark hair, but her eyes, Sarah's eyes, were unchanged. Mom, she whispered. Elizabeth Hamilton smiled. Hello, my darling. But, how? Victoria helped me fake my death, Elizabeth explained, embracing her daughter. It was the only way to protect you while I worked underground, helping other legacy children escape. I couldn't contact you until I was sure Blackwood was gone. Sarah clung to her mother, years of questions and longing pouring out in tears. Thomas joined their embrace, the family finally whole. But their reunion was interrupted by alarms. Lucy rushed in, her eyes wide. They're coming. All of them. Every legacy child we haven't found yet, they're all heading here. The satellite feeds confirmed it. Across the globe, enhanced children were moving toward New York. Their shared consciousness had called them home. It's time, Elizabeth said softly. The moment I've been preparing for. Humanity stands at a crossroads. These children can either be humanity's greatest hope or its greatest fear. Sarah looked at her mother, understanding at last. That's why you let me grow up away from all this. You wanted me to understand both worlds, to be a bridge between them. You have your father's compassion, your aunt's strength, and hopefully some of my wisdom, Elizabeth smiled. The legacy children trust you because you're one of them. Humanity trusts you because you protect their interests too. You can guide them toward a future where both enhanced and unenhanced humans coexist in peace. Outside, the first wave of new arrivals reached the estate's gates. Children of all ages, from all corners of the world, drawn by their shared genes and shared destiny. Sarah stood before them, feeling their hopes, fears, and dreams merging with her own. She was no longer the maid who exposed a family's secrets. She was a leader, a teacher, a protector. "Welcome home," she said, opening the gates. "Welcome to the real legacy." As the children flooded in, Sarah felt her mother's hand slip into hers. The Hamilton estate would no longer be a house of darkness and secrets. It would be a beacon of hope, a school for a new generation of extraordinary humans who would use their gifts not to control, but to protect. The story that began with a maid uncovering a wealthy family's darkest secret had become something far greater, the dawn of a new chapter in human evolution. And Sarah Mitchell Hamilton, daughter of Elizabeth, sister of Thomas, would lead the way into that bright new future. After all, that was her true inheritance, not the genetic modifications or the family fortune, but the courage to fight for justice, the wisdom to guide with compassion, and the strength to protect those who needed her most. As the sun set on the Hamilton estate, Sarah looked at her assembled family, both blood and chosen, and smiled. Some secrets were meant to be exposed. Some legacies were meant to be transformed. And some stories were meant to change the world.